Hello creatures, welcome to Bound by Words. My name is Maddie. I am a freelance editor and fantasy writer, and today we are going to be going over how to talk about our books. So today we are going to be going over 3 different ways that you can talk about your book or your current work in progress to anybody who might ask the dreaded question, what are you working on? It's something that I think writers get a lot, and you get it from a whole bunch of different people. Sometimes people you don't know at all, and sometimes people that you have like a really close relationship with. So we're going to go over 3 different ways to talk about your books, and they're going to get progressively more intimate. So the first way is for the general person who asks, maybe somebody you don't feel like you really are obligated to share with, like if it's obvious that they don't really care, or they're asking to be polite, and that is genre and audience. So for my particular book that I'm working on now, I would say I am working on a YA fantasy novel that sums up who I'm writing to, what genre I'm writing in, and sort of like the length all in one. It's short and sweet, and a lot of people don't press more unless they're genuinely interested in your book. So I think it is a great place to start, especially if you just stumble into somebody, say like in the coffee shop, and they're like, hey, you've been here for 2 hours, what are you working on? You could say, hey, I'm writing a book. And nearly everybody in response says, oh, what are you writing? And sometimes it's genuine interest, and sometimes it's more interest in the act of writing than it is your individual piece. So I think that's like a nice opener to determine, like, are they interested in learning more? Do they want to talk about writing? Or are they just being curious? So that's sort of my go-to at the beginning. The next one is setting. So I think people underestimate how much you can give away about your book with the setting. Whether your book takes place in the future, in the past, whether there's electric, whether it is high fantasy or contemporary, things like that, can give away a lot of details of how your book reads. I definitely get like very strong vibes from high fantasy books, and I get very relaxed vibes from contemporary books, and I know that that is different for everybody. But sharing your setting is a way that you can tell the person you're speaking to if they're going to be interested in your book, like fairly quickly. I personally am not like a big fan of the sci-fi alien genre, so I know right away if somebody is describing their book as futuristic or spacey or high technology, that it just might not be my read. But in the same genre, like the sci-fi fantasy, if they were to say like it's a high fantasy and it takes place before like electricity was established, there's a lot of travel, there's totally different maps, things like that really pique my attention, even though they're sort of rolled into one genre. So describing your setting can do a lot for the person you're talking to. So going back to using my book as an example, my book takes place in a world where the magic is tied strongly to the earth and a treaty that the races have with the earth itself, and whenever the treaty is broken, it sort of wreaks havoc on the magic system in the story. So that lets my readers know that there are a lot of fantastical elements. There's definitely creatures, which it doesn't give away explicitly there, but I think a lot of the times with fantasy elements, there's sort of an implication of the possibility of creatures. It also lets people know that there's a different map and that it is high fantasy because it's obviously not contemporary with all this magic going on. So just a short 1 or 2 sentence description of your setting for your novel can do a lot for the person that you're talking to. It can ease their curiosity enough that they feel like they don't have to push. And I know some writers are very eager to talk about their work, and they're very eager to share the things they're working on, and that is wonderful. And some writers are very reserved, and that is just as valid. If you're not ready to share your work, maybe you haven't established it yet, I'm always really hesitant to share things about my book before I get a good portion of it done because I know they're going to change. If you have followed any of my past blogs, especially my most recent ones, I have recently decided that I'm redoing my book from the beginning, like from word 1, I am rewriting my book. So there are definitely a lot of elements that are going to change, but I think the setting is something that I'm keeping and that's going to be pretty consistent. So these like levels of like intimacy are also levels of like how well do you know your book. Some plotters have all this figured out in advance, and some pantsers are 50% of the way through the book and they're like, you know, I still couldn't put this in words. I'm not sure yet until I hit the climax. And I totally understand that because as readers, we sort of have that feeling whenever we're reading books. We get ideas and inclinations of the world, and for things that are very well written, we're pretty immersed quickly, but I know a lot of my favorite reads, I learn things about the setting continuously throughout the book. So it is a little bit more difficult to talk about your setting than it is just your genre and your reading audience. Some authors don't even decide their genre and their reading audience up front, which as a writer, I don't think I would be able to do that, because I want to know if I'm going to be incorporating contemporary elements and technology or fantastical elements and stuff like that. So it's like one of my baselines to get me in to like my writing zone is to have that base information. But there are some writers that I have heard that just don't know what genre they're writing in until they get more of the story out. Another way you can talk about setting, other than just your like a couple sentence blurb about, hey, here's what's going on, is through like Pinterest boards and picture collages and things like that. A lot of people share these whenever they're talking about their protagonists and their characters, because we want to get a sort of visual representation of what they look like and maybe the type of clothes they wear and stuff like that. You can just as easily do this for your setting. You can find pictures of different areas, you can find pictures of different like weather patterns and seasons and stuff like that, and share those to your social media, or even just keep them in your writing folder so you have them for reference. But it is a very exciting way, and I think easy to digest way of sharing your setting, especially with social media platforms like Instagram now, where it's all focused on pictures. So my pictures keep falling off the wall because the ticky tack is not holding them up. So I'm gonna have to find a better solution to that. Don't mind them, they're just going down one at a time in the background. But what I was saying is that Instagram is a good platform for sharing pictures. I know a lot of writers who share just a picture of, my main character would wear this, and this is what I'm working on, or the setting in this scene is like this, and this is how I like to describe things, stuff like that. And those posts generally get a lot of feedback because writers love seeing that from other writers. And I can't speak for everybody, but I personally really enjoy seeing those types of posts. So moving on to the third way that you could talk about your novel is you can forego the entire genre, reading audience, settings part of your book, and you can talk about your protagonist. Just your protagonist. You can talk about who they are, you can talk about what their character arc is, and you can talk about maybe some of their motivations. Is your protagonist running from somebody? Is your protagonist looking to meet somebody? Is your protagonist somebody who is fitfully restful and they travel a lot and they have these short-term relationships? Whatever it is, you can really pull a lot of your character's attitude into your description of your book. There are a lot of stories, and we call them character-driven stories, where we can just like forego the entire plot, like not even focus on the plot, and we can talk about the protagonist's choices and how they handle things and how they react to things and their relationships, and it says a lot about the story without having to add anything else. Now, the trick to this, and this is why it's number 3 and like the most intimate, as I said earlier, way to describe your book, is you have to have that figured out. You have to know your protagonist, you have to be writing them, working with them, maybe even have a solid like tone of voice for them whenever you're writing. And none of these are necessarily like required. Like nobody's following around saying, hey, you haven't figured that voice out, so you can't actually describe your protagonist like that. Nobody's checking you on this, but I think it is a lot easier if you know who you're writing and you know what their attitude is and what their motivations are. So as an extra bonus way that you could talk about your book, this is something that I totally made up, so I don't think that you'll find this advice in many other places, but you can talk about your background plot. And that's also a term I made up. I don't actually know what you would see or read if you were to Google that. But your background plot is the bigger picture things that are happening in your setting. So if this is like your world, if your world is my palm, then your protagonist is this small section of it that we are following around and we are interacting and we are connecting with. But there is a whole world that they're existing in, that things are happening to them. This is actually how I describe my book closer to the beginning of this video, saying that it is written in a setting where magic is tied to the earth and a treaty between the races. That description is a big picture idea of what is going on in my world, and it is not my like pinpointed what my protagonist is doing. This is a creative way to share what you're working on without necessarily giving too much away. And there are a lot of pros to doing something like this. One of the bigger ones is if you are still figuring out your character voice, if you're still figuring out their motivations, if you're still not 100% sure on what the setting is, but you have this general idea of how you want your book to read, you can incorporate that into how you talk about your book. And one of the reasons I use this to describe my book is because it is undergoing a big rewrite, and I'm not sure which parts of my story I'm keeping and which parts I'm scrapping, but I do know that it is set in the same general world, so I can describe it with the same terms. So if you enjoyed this video, make sure you give it a thumbs up and hit the subscribe button, because I post writing related videos every Monday. If you're active on Instagram, I will put my Instagram handle above my head. It'll also be in the description down below next to my website if you need edits, credits, or if you want to sign up for my monthly newsletter, that'll be the place to go. I will see you guys next week.